of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He's the omnipotent and the omnipresence. He's everywhere in every way. He's the mighty God of victory, and He's my light and my salvation. I know, yes, I know. When the wicked come against me, they shall stumble and fall. I know, yes, I know. Even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I shall fear no evil because Jah is with me. I know, yes, I know. And if Jah be for me, no one can be against me. I know, oh yes, I know. I know, I know, I know, I know.
This one's going out to Changa and to Geneva. Hope you're having a great afternoon.
Bright, just like the sunshine. If you look carefully, surely you will see the sign that I'm standing on the solid rock of Jah. So no matter what the wicked do, they can't stop me. No weapon fashioned against me shall prosper. You know why? Jah is my light and my salvation. I know, oh yes, I know. When the wicked come against me, they shall stumble and fall. I know, yes, I know. Even though I walk through the
to bless me.
This one is Tony Tough and Cutie Roots, More Love.
Separation, divide and conquer. We need more love on ya, more love on ya. We need more love on ya. Too much separation, divide and conquer. We need more love on ya, more love on ya. Hey. Too much racial hatred. There's too much more true life, and the innocent people have to suffer. Too much poverty, hatred, grudge, and enmity. No war in this time. We must learn to come together. We need more love on ya. More separation, divide and conquer. We need more love.
You're in tune to bless me.
This one's for Bingy.
Wrong move, you're making wrong move, James Peter. Wrong move, y'all. Yeah. Wrong move, a lot of them are make wrong move. We see them with the gun in them. Wrong move, yes, some of them are make wrong move. Say them up, yeah. You see them over here, yes, you see them over there. Yes, they're moving like they just don't care. Some of them are hide, and some of them are peep. Yes, some of them are live in fear. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Watch them with the gun in them. Wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. Instead they want to shut up the land. Wrong move up abroad, wrong move down a yard. Yes, some of them are camouflage, but if the night should turn today, a lot of them would run away because of wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. See them with the gun in them. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Say them want to kill them brother man, but this king done see them no love the wrong move. God that they move can make you improve. This king done see them no love the wrong move. God that they move and you're bound to lose. Wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. That's so much of a wrong move. Hey, you them brother, call him the wrong move, me say inna him head. Out on the corner, molesting people daughter. Go in a shop and them a call him robber. Inna the dance, him a coke sniffer. Out on the road, him a rock seller. A wrong move. Yes, some of them a make wrong move. Them with the gun inna them. Wrong move. A lot of them a make wrong move. Say them want to mash up the land. Wrong move. Better improve. Hey. You see them over here, you see them over there. Moving and them moving like them just don't care. Some of them are hide, some of them are peep. Yes, some of them are live in fear. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Watch it down. Wrong move. I know say you're the wrong move. Say you want to kill them brother man. Wrong move in a yard. Wrong move up abroad. Oh yes, I know you're a camouflage. If night should turn today, a lot of them would run away because of wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. See them with the gun in them. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Night them born, kill them brother man. For promotion, bossy them no make wrong move. Cause that the little move can make you improve.
This track was Sugar Moonlight and Wrong Moon. This one coming up is Niche Wadada, Wicked Man.
This one is for all the wicked man acting in the name of Jah. Stealing conscience. So act towards another in the spirit of mankind. Right to life, liberty, I take shine. In the eyes of Jaja, we are the same one. All born the same under Jaja's sun. So what makes you feel you are the special one? You're out of the law that's universal.
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio. To Bless Radio.
Spreading injustice. Spreading injustice. Who do you think you are? You better check yourself.
This one is Maasai Warrior and Fire Dog. It's going out there to Tasha and to Drea. This one goes out to Buzzy B. Hope you're alright and resting up there. Shout out also there to DJ Mr. P. Thanks for that one.
Bless Radio. You're in tune to Bless Radio.
Greetings for those of you who's just joined us on the Sister Lil show on Bless Radio, 92.9 FM, or that's www.blessradio.org. Now, before we start, we'd like to thank the Most High for bringing us through this week and for keeping us for any situations that could have been worse, and for also blessing us with the gift of life. We also want to say thank you to Bless Radio for providing this platform for us to have this reasoning here tonight. I'm in the studio with brother Theo.
Yes. Oh, that really sounds kind of good tonight. Nah, that's a good sign. That is a good portent for tonight's show. That's what I reckon here. Yeah. And all the smiling and laughter. That sets the tone. So we can kick this off and can continue from there on.
Absolutely. So, Theo and I have done 2 shows together on the subject of how to live a clean psychological life. And on the first show we talked about what that actually means and the reason why we were talking about it, because to have a clean psychological life means in turn that you have a clean spiritual space, so you are free. And I was telling the listeners that I came to that point because of spending quite a lot of time within nursing homes, so seeing the elderly and listening a lot to their recollection of things that they wish had done, relationships that they wish they'd mended, also places they wish they'd been to, risks they wish they had taken during their lives. So that's what brought me to the point of doing that. And last week we started to look at the ego personality and what that actually means within having a clean spiritual space for that room to be free from any of the domino effects or frisbee effects of energy when you pour out something negative to an individual, and then you have that coming back around of certain, some like to say karma. Some like to say karma, and some like to just put it down to a coincidence and so on. But this week, the show, the third part to what we've been discussing here tonight, and it's called the Residue. This show's called the Residue Show. You might ask, why am I saying the residue? So, we're going to be looking at residue from a socially cultural perspective in relationship to interpersonal relationships. Now, these things are not always easy to look at, but it's important, as they can be in complete opposition, I'd say, to the balance of community progression. And the residual impacts of generations of slavery, and opens up the discussion of how the black community in the UK can use the strengths we have gained in the past to heal in the present. So we're looking at some of the impacting negatives of interpersonal relationships and ourselves, and what we can start to do to strive forward in a more positive manner. But before Theo and I get into that, I'm going to play another track for you before we start there, Theo. And the track is by Shantiyala, and it's called Humble Yourself.
that mind, humble yourself. Better practice what you preach before it's too late. We better love one another. We better love our sister, our brother.
Greetings everyone, for those of you who've just joined me. That track was Shantiyala and it was called Humble Yourself. Now this week's show is called Residue, and I was saying a little earlier before this track, what do I mean by that, or what do we mean by that here tonight, because I'm joined by Brother Theo. And I was saying that the residual impacts of generations of slavery, and opens up the discussion of how, I guess, our community, the black community, can use strengths that we've gained in the past to heal for the present, and I guess also for the future as well, for the future generations to come. So we're going to be looking at some of the negative impacts on interpersonal relationships and things that we've accepted that are not necessarily true for us. So one of the areas that Theo and I going to be discussing is the spiritual attack. So when there's no provocation in all of these actions that I'm going to talk about tonight. So when there's no provocation and you get a spiritual attack, and so a spiritual attack would be, say, unnecessary, aggressive and hostile speech, attitude and behaviors.
Yeah. So then, yeah. I mean, when we discuss that whole thing, coming into those. So what happens when this unnecessary hostility it manifests itself? It ties into an idea that I was considering recently, in that often very kind of negative aspects of behavior are misconstrued, in a sense of being even positive in an aspect. It's kind of follows on from what has become a habitual kind of behavioral pattern of indulging in very kind of negative, even insulting, disrespectful behavior, and passing it off as somehow endearing, as as being something which fortifies characters, and these kind of things then progress to a state where they're considered, normative, and a normative kind of form of conducting yourself amongst one another, and that,
because you do see this kind of behavior played out within everyday life. You can see examples of these sorts of behaviors, and quite often they're not really some have been provoked, but quite often a lot of those situations are when a person gets emotionally charged and a bit distorted in their perception of what's going on. Not in all cases, sometimes it's a defense, but we're talking about this side of the coin. So it's also, even in your deeds, your action, even silently, what your energy output is towards the person. Often people will say when you're continuously in a rage or continuously have this trigger within you, then you're not in balance or in peace within your own self. We do have many people who would love to say in a kind of denial or being aloof towards these issues that we do see happening, because at the end of the day, the denial is blocking the flow of healing, and it kind of represses the truth of the past. That and the past has fully shaped, our future and our present day. And it's something that we have to bear in mind. So, for example, we know, like within the Akan, they always talk about Sankofa. And they talk about that for a particular reason, which is to learn from the past, because the past is what brought you here today. And you should remember the lessons learnt from before to carry you forward into the future. So we also have arrogance. So an assumed and exaggerated self-importance from a slight touch of knowledge or information. So I guess that would be where having an ego check would be necessary due to having an ego personality. And if you know you have an ego personality, then it's important to make sure that it doesn't go out of balance, so you don't develop this I am beyond all of you, and it's kind of residue from this one-upmanship, right? And that was very prevalent on the plantation. So that's where we get into inherited tendencies that go down the genetic lines. Yeah.
Well, very often the what you referred to there, the unchecked antagonism. It emanates from a source of the very thing you're speaking about. So that's, it is inherited, but it is actually almost considered to be a mark of one being adjusted in a certain frame of wisdom. The whole outlook upon which this behavior is predicated comes from a wise source, either a parent or an elder who was kind of like inculcated that kind of behavior into them. And because as we're young, the whole one of the beneficial things, even though often the actual result isn't necessarily desired, is that that hierarchical arrangement of respect for the elders in the community is something that has been maintained, but then at the same time there has been a transmission of ideas and tendencies and behaviors that often don't necessarily benefit that cultural structure that's designed to have a harmonious effect amongst the people, because the way it's actually been enforced, the way it's actually been drummed in, has been an inheritance from, as you said, from an abusive structure, an abusive institution, an abusive kind of arrangement in which, very unhealthy power relationships and concepts were developed.
Yeah, however, while I'm saying this, we are aware, as we all are, I'm sure, that we're not ignoring the fact that individuals do need to take account for or should I say responsibility for their own behaviours. So yes, there may be all these things within the social and cultural history. However, it's not to ignore or to dampen down the importance of actually checking in with self and your own responsibility for your own behaviours as well. But we cannot ignore the truth of why we are here now.
Yeah, I mean that pretty much comes from, you know, being aware of even and actually surpassing those more negative traits with those things which are, you know, geared towards, you know, building more supportive, beneficial coalitions amongst us. So those things lie at the very foundation of that. It's a case of really dispelling these ideas that are supposed to be beneficial but are in fact negative, are actually counter to spiritual growth and actual collective responsibilities and collective, you know, beneficial relationships amongst us. So I agree with what you're saying in that respect there. That and it hasn't actually been totally eradicated. As I said, it's still there and something that can be increasingly fostered, you know, with the right attitudes.
Yes, absolutely. Also want to go on to another bit where it's being very withdrawn as well. So this withdrawal of self from being in a person who interacts, and this is not about shyness. It's this withdrawal, this learning to be in this kind of subservient position all the time, and even carrying that behavior along socially. There's also this, as we were speaking earlier, taking kindness for weakness. So it's assumed ideas and amateur assessments of people's energies, especially related to those that you think are really calm, or so honest, she's so chilled, or he's so kind and gentle. People, there's this assumption failure for the Colosseum, as it were, and this is having this assumption about someone really it's not a qualification for being uncouth with this individual, because you think you can project this level of power and control over the person, and because you feel that they are not as strong as you or not as bold as you, and you could be nothing further from the truth. Somebody could say that, make such a statement based on how somebody sounds, and that alone can, you know, gives people this idea that it's a space to be judgmental on the individual.
Because aggression, because outgoing nature, aggression, these kinds of very dominant, what we call extroversion, is always associated with the strength. Does have this effect of attracting people to it, because it lifts them in a sense. So yeah, the more kind of placid type of character is going to be, you know, devalued in a certain respect, and obviously one not to be kind of considered to be you know, worthy.
Yeah, because
worthy of the, you know, the heavy association sweepstakes department. You can find yourself isolated in a sense, but then because
people have this assumption of the individual being some sort of shrinking violet. However, we also seem to be forgetting, when we make such sentiments, that the dog with the loudest bark 9 times out of 10 has the smallest bite.
Yeah, but just continuing on from there. What often, yeah, what, yeah, often the less aggressive person, the less outgoing person who's actually perceived to be weak, and then, yeah, because what happens in that very scenario that you're talking about is that that can be a very that can be a costly mistake in underestimating a person who doesn't necessarily project themselves in a flamboyant and aggressive
Yes.
manner, as not necessarily possessing the traits that could, you know,
How
put
can
another
the-
person in their place if they step at them in the wrong way. Because so
But that's
very
quite different to just constantly having this persona of projection of self onto others on this platter. You know, it's when you I guess what we say, because many people who are quieter really are silent warriors, and they're more interested in, I guess, humanitarianism. So for a person who goes around snarling, like how did they say, like a bull in a china shop? What does a bull in a china shop do? They just break plates, and that's what you're doing on a spiritual plateau. You're breaking things.
yeah, yeah.
If you or you know of people with that kind of behavioral patterns.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the whole adage "cruel to be kind" comes to mind there. So, you know, this is one of these things, and it cuts across many different aspects of what we're calling interpersonal relationships here. You know, and they become embedded messages, and they become mantras for proceeding in all types of affairs, as a means of pretty much controlling the outcome of these events.
Yeah, because that's another thing. I'm glad you made that point, because there's the other areas also controlling behaviors of others. So, for example, domination of others, power over others can be spiritual or it can be physical. But we're talking on a spiritual plane now. And manipulation of others for one's own ego brushing. So it can be deemed as one of the accepting of certain of that behavior that was a manifestation quite prevalent on the plantations. So this again is something that is quite deep-seated and inherited as a behavior. And it also poses a look of, I guess, careless selfishness.
Yeah.
So why would I say selfishness? Because the spiritual well-being of others is not being considered at those points. So being nil and void towards somebody else's, as though somebody else's needs, as though they're a non-entity, puts you in a karmic situation.
Yeah. Yeah, more yeah, because more vibrational than, see, if we look at manipulation, if we're looking at manipulation, then that is by very nature, if we're going to look at it from the spiritual aspect, then manipulation is diametrically opposed to any kind of spiritual endeavor. It's entirely anti-spiritual. It takes a person, it separates a person from their spiritual direction.
Absolutely.
When you are manipulating somebody. In an actual fact, when what manipulation does in having that effect is to kind of like shed a light on the person doing the manipulating has actually got a flaw that really isn't actually being looked at closely enough and addressed, because the need to actually manipulate and control an outcome is to be subject to your own insecurity.
Yes.
You know, subject to your own insecurity, and that whatever that insecurity you want to fend off from manipulating other people would then, of course, lead to revealing very kind of unappealing aspects of yourself. So in order to, avoid that eventuality, then manipulation has to come into all your interactions in order to kind of control and conceal that which is kind of lacking, so which when placed against, in juxtaposition, wow, what a word, from, spiritual practices is people interacting together and working together in a cooperative state.
Yes.
You see, manipulation is spiritual blindness.
Yes, because you're not seeing the overall picture. You're not seeing the good for all. You have very tunnel. It's having tunnel vision in any situation that you're in. And when you have tunnel vision, you're not able to see the whole picture, and therefore you cannot benefit from the whole experience and actually spiritually develop and spiritually grow. So it's like if you have the chair only like in the corner of the room rather than in the middle where you can have an outward view. Some of you may not agree with that. I'd like to hear that if you have a point on 079 444 31366. I'll say that again, 079 444 31366. So yeah, that kind of selfishness and lack of consideration just means that you do not grow. As I was saying just a few seconds, that you don't grow, you don't nourish, you don't have a shared energy of development and a shared reward that would actually be more enlightening when everybody is being touched by this lifting up of the frequency for all. No?
Yeah, because it relates directly to the love-fear dynamic. So selfishness is rooted in fear. Selfishness is rooted in attachment to things that stave off the fear dynamic and doesn't encourage the other one. So it roots back to there. So when you're looking at the spiritual aspects of things, when you're looking at the whole the way how the ego is centered within a certain kind of restricted view of self in relation to others, then it will manifest itself in things that root from a fear aspect of any event that is encountered, which then of course always lead, because obviously fear leads to other things, which then that also encourages what we mentioned earlier, which is the unchecked antagonisms. Hence why it's often said, anger, aggression is a mask for things which are rooted in fears.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I was saying that I gave that quote, this traditional quote of a dog that has the largest bark has the smallest bite, because it is a facade to camouflage other things that are going on a deeper level within the individual. Absolutely. And what we are why we're looking at this is because in order to move forward, one really needs to heal the past, or at least start to recognize, at least make an attempt to address some of these injuries within yourself, really. And if you can help somebody else to recognize certain things within themselves that are not really nourishing or progressive to themselves, because if you are developed within yourself, you can share a better version of yourself with others and help to raise the bar in other people, also raise their frequency, change their energy. You notice if you go into a room and it's all a little bit quiet, it only takes one person with a really bubbly, high energy personality to change that atmosphere in that space. Or even say a telephone call, you may have a call and speak to one individual and have a really negative, heavy conversation, and speak to the next person, as you all know, and have a very enlightening and uplifting, and you feel energized when you speak to this person, and they feel energized, and you have this amazing exchange. Now, wouldn't this be beautiful to see more of this kind of output across the community? Now, what we're going to touch on here is this thing going around called was going around quite heavily, and it was called what it is PTSS. So what is PTSS? PTSS is a theory pardon me, is a theory that explains the etymology of many of the adaptive survival behaviors. So, for example, in the African, Caribbean, American communities throughout, let's say throughout the diaspora. So it's a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression for Africans and their descendants, resulting from centuries of chattel slavery. So it's a form of slavery which predictated on the belief that African Americans, Caribbean, people throughout the whole diaspora from their continent were inherently, or I guess they used to say, genetically inferior to Europeans or other nations. And this was then followed by, we'd have to say, institutionalized racism, which continues to perpetrate injury. So it results in something that is called MAP. So it's addressing damage and spiritual pain. Is often, I'd say, is often maybe an uncomfortable stance for some people. So, for some of us, it's easier to become aloof with this kind of subject, because it's easier than dealing with the subject because of the information that you come across and things that you open within yourself of emotions and attachments to, like, our historical energies. So what is MAP? MAP is multi-generational trauma together with continued oppression. A is the absence of opportunity to heal or access the benefits available in society and leads to post-traumatic slave syndrome. And under these circumstances, there are some predictable patterns of behavior that tend to occur, and you're going to see like a correlation between what I was talking about a little earlier and studies that have been done, especially by a lady called Dr. DeGurvey in the States, and she wrote the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. So, for example, insufficient development of what refers to a primary esteem, so along with feelings of hopelessness, depression, and general self-destructive outlook. So that ties in with what you were saying a little earlier, Theo, about this kind of repressed rage or repressed pain or repressed situations and wounds that you haven't addressed. So again, it's a general self-destructive outlook. So it's marked by a propensity for anger and violence, as we were just talking about. So anger doesn't mean that you're picking up the broom and licking down somebody. Anger could be in how you interact with somebody, how you behave with them, how you speak to them, how you look at them. All those things. You can look at someone angrily, you can speak, in all those areas. You can do all of this in anger. And so you get people saying, oh, this one is volatile, Well, volatile is this behavior. Oh, they're hot tempered. Hot tempered is this behavior. Again, so also what comes under this is these extreme feelings of suspicion or suspicious behaviors, and always perceiving negative motivations of others or violence against self. I mean, some people, when you take it to the extreme, are like self-harmers. And you know, some people might not just be harming themselves, others may turn to harming the property and other people, like actually lashing out at their fellow person, just people within their circle. It could even be, as I'm saying, within their circle, their own family member or a very close friend that this lashing out can happen to. So what I mean by that is friends, relatives, or acquaintances even. There's also for some an uncomfortable subject, so racist socialization and internalized racism. We get people saying a lot of labeling words, as I'm not going to repeat them on there, but the sentiments of how you perceive somebody's behavior where they don't seem culturally familiar enough. So there's all of this, like learned helplessness, a distorted self-concept, and an aversion for, say, the members of one's own identified cultural or ethnic group, as I was just saying, or the customs associated with one's own group, the physical characteristics of one's own identified group, and I don't mean physical characteristics, how they're seen in the eyes of other nations looking at you, but within your own nation, how it sees itself. So from this, the lady did do a book called, as I was saying earlier, for those of you who've just joined me, it was called The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and it includes her research in both Africa and America, and she draws on a lot of the experiences that she had, and looked at different areas of PTSS. And I'll say it again, PTSS, post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic slave disorder.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to leave the Caribbean out of the analysis. I've actually seen a few of the video presentations by Dr. DeGray, and she does actually. I believe she does make specific references to the Caribbean also, as well as the United States, in that the underlying point that's being made is that, which is of key relevance and everything, and a very kind of has that kind of compelling link to all of these things we're discussing, is that what's unique is that an effort to pretty much remove any and all vestiges of African social life, wherever they'd landed in this so-called New World, as such as it was referred to. That was pretty much what the whole effort was aimed towards, was removing all those vestiges of that which would then lead to cohesive interaction between anyone who had actually been subjected to this kind of treatment from this whole process of enslavement, which then, even after so-called emancipation, continued and morphed and shifted its modes of operation into other forms, which then continue the process.
Like for example, we've got things like colorism, we've got things like skin bleaching, we've got things like all of the areas that we were speaking on before about repressed anger. what about the heavy beatings? Used to be a common part of our community. So definitely those areas, I definitely agree with that.
Mm. But what's important to remember is the power aspect of things, and that's really what, that's really what really is key in the whole thing, because the whole way of enforcing power and of actually, you know, as aligned with or combined with removing, you know, the cultural aspects which, you know, kept people together. So, you know, the splitting of families, as and other things that you've mentioned, you know, was all part and parcel of removing this whole cohesive idea. Where it relates in terms of power and those kinds of behaviors you mentioned, particularly the whole strength weakness dynamic comes to, and you mentioned the whole fatalistic outlook, the kind of siege mentalities, and that manifests in a way that, you know, somebody being or appearing to be sincere, appearing to be kind, appearing to be honest is seen suspiciously, and they are in fact unwarrantedly attacked, because this is not a natural consequence of these power relationships that have kind of like come in and subsumed the cultural social practices that were existing before the intervention and the interruption of that cultural continuity. So that's what brings about this whole kind of thing where, you know, kindness is looked as a kind of weakness or something to be attacked, because it's also associated with the way in which the Europeans interacted was to be that kind of insincere, disingenuous way of operating. So then when you're in a situation where hierarchically you're placed at a lower level, then it then becomes a way of interacting with one another. So you're not being spiteful, you're being nice. What are you up to? I don't trust you. You know, what did it say? Best defense is offense. I'm taking you out.
Yeah,
You see?
absolutely. But these are all manifestations, like you're saying, of inherited behaviors from those situations. We can't totally ignore it, regardless of some people saying, "Oh, it was 100 years ago. We don't need to look at that anymore." Well, the past is what's brought you here today. So it is important to look at those things, because what we want is to see a better output. So we're going to have a little break now. We're going to have a little break, and Theo and I are going to play you another track now, and it's by Nish Wadada, and it's called Ja Calling.
If you listen to the voice inside, in a distance, the trumpets are blowing a lullaby. He who listens shall hear angels sing. He who looks shall see deep within. Up in the sky, reaching so high, feel the breeze of the morning sun.
You're in tune to Bliss Radio.
Coming down, bringing the message of highly high. He who listens shall hear angels sing. He who looks shall see deep within. Just calling. can't we stop the killing? Why can't we stop the fighting? And to live in unity. Every day we're fighting, taking our brother's life. It's time for peace. Yeah, it's time for peace. Beautiful world the Father's given us living, and all we do is make war, yeah, war. You know, it's time we start to live like human beings and not like untamed animals. Remember the poets and girls we'll be the men and women of tomorrow. We have to live, yes we must live for them to see.
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio.
And Theo and I are back after that little break there. The last track I played was by Sonia Spence, and it's called Peace and Unity. Before we get back into our reasoning though, I'd just like to make a few announcements. We've got on Saturday the 28th of July, we've got at the West Indian Cultural Centre, it's the 31st year anniversary, and it is a charity event. So the West Indian Cultural Centre, Saturday the 28th of July, it's 9 Clarendon Road, London, N8 ODD. There'll be a 3-course meal, live entertainment, fashion show, guest speakers, and much more. The sounds are by King Joshua Sound and Crew. The DJs will be Trevor Rass Sax, DJ Flip, DJ Fresh, Bless Radio FM crew, Selector Ras Dragon from in-house here. Big up Ras Dragon, Ringo Moses, big up Ras Moses, and also Raggedy there. So Ringo, Raggedy and Dragon from in-house will be at the event DJing there. And special guest Donovan King J. So I hope you guys can make it. We've also got on this Sunday, we've got Auntie Jean's Cultural Market. It's a great craft event, and there will also be a guest speaker there. It'll be Empress Divine, who those of you who've heard her on this show before, hearing her interview, she's doing Divine Healthy Living, so Feel Fit for Life presentation. You'll be able to book your body MOT biochemical assessment, bring a friend for bonus savings, and if your body could speak, would you listen? So that's Auntie Jean's Cultural Market. It's Galloway House, 57 Mill Harbour, Canary Wharf, E14 9 D, and that's this Sunday. And it's starting from, I think it's from 1 till 8, if I remember correctly. And your nearest station is the DLR Cross Harbour. And just ask anyone from there on. So that's a great event and a wonderful atmosphere at the Auntie Jean's Cultural Market in Canary Wharf. So going back to what Theo and I were talking about a little earlier, for those of you who've just joined me, and we have been looking at the relationship between the cultural elements of from a historical context to present day, and some of the manifestations of inherited tendencies and cultural sentiments that have been normalized, as Theo and I have been bashing out here, have been normalized when they're not really a true, or necessarily a true reflection of who we are as a group of people. And some may not like to hear that, but for us to all move forward for the greater good. And it's not just that this post-traumatic slave syndrome only affects one group of people. We've highlighted some of the behaviours, and you can see those behaviours being played out. So it's not just the person who has been on the receiving end of these behaviours. What about the person who has actually been the perpetrator? How do they really feel? So moving forward is a benefit for all, really, and I guess that's where we have to look at, take stock of self and start our own journey of self-healing. And it's a great gift to yourself to be addressing those areas of trauma that cause us to manifest in certain ways, which is not really our reflection. They're adopted behaviours, and they're adopted behaviours that have been normalised, which is not really, it's dampening down the true you. So I say, let your true energy be free from all these shackles and these psychological chains, so that you can able to move forward. And then, you know, it again will have that domino effect whether something's positive or negative. I choose to have a positive, wouldn't you say, Theo? A positive domino effect.
Yeah. When you say that there, see, because what we're dealing with is obviously a group phenomenon, and always has to be looked at from that angle rather than from an individual kind of perspective, in terms of how, because obviously, you know, the underlying theme here is how people are relating, and as you said, not just necessarily those who are actually on the sharp end of you know, disagreeable behaviors and practices, but those who are actually somehow compelled to behave disagreeably, and then what the actual source motivating factors and purposes are behind all of that. And you know, one of the key themes that I'm going back to is the whole idea of how power concepts and relationships are played out within and throughout these actual interactions. And you see, so where it relates to the post-traumatic slave syndrome is that, you know, the importance of destroying, the importance of warping and distorting and disfiguring cultural continuity of a people was paramount for those who were at the forefront of the enslavement project. And the culture really is the important thing. And what you said about, you know, restoring certain values and ideas and beliefs, and you know what the reason for actually living is key to actually overcoming those setbacks, key to overcoming those kinds of aggressions and understanding them for what they are. Because at the heart of it all is that power is not so much a concept that's realized through dominating and controlling others. Power comes through developing and motivating and producing and creating from yourself. And whenever you overcome a problem, you are actually creating and redeveloping and recreating yourself. So whenever you're actually finding solutions, you know, that's your creativity. That's your own self mastery. You're creating mastery within yourself whenever you overcome and meet the solution with a beneficial outcome. And then when that can be translated in the same fashion, in that what you said, the domino effect that you're referring to, when that can be translated and transmitted in the same kind of fashion that these negativities have been established and continued and conformed to, then that brings about transformation, you see. So, and obviously, you know, it all takes place within cultural contexts, because it has to be about the cultural context, which is, and another way of looking at culture, as I came across years ago, is the, you know, the highest aspirations of a group.
Yes.
You see.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, Theo. I think you said it better myself there. Well, very good.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
It's true. Yeah, recognition, as we were saying earlier, is the first stage. So I guess once we're able to actually recognize that there are these issues and actually start to address them and start to a dialogue going about these things. I know people were talking about it a lot when she released her book. However, these things have not been resolved, and yes, it does take time to resolve them over a long period of time. But it is possible to see this healing within people. So the next track I'm going to play for you is a 12-inch by Melanek, and it is called Night Doctor. It's a dub track.
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio. To Bless Radio.
This one's going out to Beacon, Deck and Darryl.
Mankind is
Bless Radio. Bless. You're in tune to Bless Radio.
Jaja give me overstanding now. Hey, you know the right from wrong. Yeah. Jaja give me victory, 'cause I love me. Always say, we follow his footsteps day and night along the way. Yes, Jaja he loves us. We are his children. Yeah, yeah. Jaja came for us all. Jah, you were standing tall. Jaja give me victory. Yeah. Over Babylon, y'all. Jaja give me overstanding now. Yeah. You know the right from wrong. Jaja give me victory. Yeah. Over Babylon, y'all. Jaja give me overstanding now. Hey, you know the right from wrong. Jaja give me victory. Yes, him give me victory. In a Babylon, yeah. In a Babylon, yeah. Yes, him give me victory.
The last track there was Singer Blue and Victory. This track we're about to play is Boney L and Rise Up, because that's where we'd like to be rising up.
We'll stand up and we'll rise up together, sing. On the way. And we'll rise up together, singing. We'll stand up in the morning. We'll stand up in the day. We'll stand up, hearts together. We'll stand up. Hear this I say, strong like the mountain, roots in the sea. And we'll rise up together, singing. This I know in my heart. Once we join together, oh, none shall harm. In the city, we'll stand up. In the streets, and we'll rise up together, singing. We'll stand up, flow like a river. We'll stand up, feed the trees. And we'll rise up together, singing. This I know in my heart. Once we join together, oh, none shall harm. We'll stand up. We'll stand up. And we'll rise up together, singing. Rise up, rise up. Rise up, rise up. Rise up, rise up. Rise up in love. Rise up in love. Rise up in love. Rise up in love. We'll stand up. We'll stand up. We'll stand up.
Yes, my people. So rise up, as Boney Eldis sang. Rising up is what we are talking about. Healing all of these scars from the past that have come down, the inherited tendencies. And tonight we're looking at the comparison to certain behavior traits in relationship to what is post-traumatic slave syndrome, because our topics for the past 3 weeks have been about how to live in a clean psychological life, or how to live a clean psychological life. And we came to the conclusion of the reason for this was that we needed to have, for those of you who have just tuned into the tail end, we really do need, and we have to have freedom. We have to have freedom, so we want that clear spiritual space, so we don't have those karmic situations. So we don't have that. But I'd like to say we are 15 minutes over the time, and I'd like to give thanks to Brother Theo for coming in and actually reasoning with us for the third time on Bless Radio on a 3-part series that we've had. And for those of you who've missed the other 2, please go to Bless Radio Bless One on the YouTube channel. We have our own channel there where you can catch up to shows that you've missed during the week. So thank you very much, Brother Theo, for contributing so well and so fruitfully for the past 3 weeks.
Well, yeah, thank you for. Yes, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to actually contribute and participate in the discussion. Too bad we don't have another hour tonight to continue more things. But yeah, that's been a great discussion, and I've enjoyed that, and I've and a good night to all the Blessed listeners, and shout out to Bless FM, and to my all the Speakers Club crew, all the Uptown crew, and all the other people who are out there who support the show and everything like that. So thank you very much and good night.
Yeah. So once again, thank you, Blessed listeners, for letting us bend your ear for the past 2 hours, and I hope to see you here the same time next week for the Sister Lil Show on Bless Radio 8 to 10 every Friday. Have a blessed week, and see you next time.